Hello everyone! I am Jocelyn Dalingding Aumenta, BSBA Marketing Management 1-1. So for today, I have to report about direct labor. So, what is direct labor does it mean? So, direct labor includes all individuals responsible for producing a company's consumer goods or services. Just for example of direct labor, include assembly line workers, production supervisors, delivery truck drivers, and quality control inspectors. Now, focus exclusively on the direct labor cost, ignoring materials and overhead. Notice that laborers were present in the middle picture from the pipe plant. This suggests on the introduction of direct labor into a costing equation, like the cost of raw materials, the salaries payable for direct labor are added to work in process inventory at stage 2 of the diagram. The following entries assume that the pipe required 200 hours of direct labor at $15 per hour. This is the following entry that I've mentioned. You can see that work in process inventory are debit to 3,000, salaries payable are credit to 3,000. For the explanation, incur direct labor to process pipe 200 hours at $15. Next is debit finished goods inventory to 3,000, then credit work in process inventory to 3,000. So for the explanation, this is transferred process pipe to finished goods. Next is debit cost of goods sold to 3,000, then credit finished goods inventory to 3,000. For the explanation, it is delivered finished goods to customers. Notice that the account used in these entries are identical to those for direct material, except that the credit in the first entry is to salaries payable. This reflects that the cost is attributable to an obligation to pay employees for their time. That's all about direct labor. So, let's proceed 14.3 about applied factory overhead. Now, let's discuss about applied factory overhead. Applied factory overhead. Take one more look at the work in process, factory floor picture, and think about the factory overhead this is being used to process the pipe. What components can you identify or contemplate? Likely, your list will include utilities cost, insurance, factory maintenance, depreciation on the equipment, some supplies, and similar items. As discussed earlier in the chapter, this cost must be attached to the product. But the method of the attachment is by applying overhead based on a predetermined estimated rate. Again, because it is virtually impossible to associate or match the incurrence of actual overhead with each job actually produced. Assume the 5 factory applies overhead at the rate of $25 per direct labor hour. Remember that 200 hours were needed for the job in question. Thus, $5,000 times $25 times 200 is the amount of applied factory overhead. The following entries are similar to those that were used to record the direct labor. Compare them and pick out the account that differs. This is the entries that I've mentioned. You can see that work in process inventory are debit to 5,000, credit factory overhead to 5,000. For the explanation, this is applied factory overhead to production, 200 hours at $25. Next is finished goods inventory, debit to 5,000, credit work in process inventory to 5,000. For the explanation, this is transferred process pipe to finished goods. Lastly, debit cost of goods sold 5,000, credit finished goods inventory to 5,000. For the explanation, it is delivered finished goods to customer. An account entitled Factory Overhead was uniquely credited in the first of the above entries. What does this credit really represent? This account is one of the more confusing to explain. It is challenging for students to grasp. As a result, there is a separate section later in this chapter. Accounting for actual and applied overhead. But for the moment, accept this truncated explanation. The credit to factory overhead is the allocation tool used to pass out the actual overhead cost to jobs in progress. The actual overhead costs are captured via debits to these accounts through a separate process described later in this chapter. So that's all about applied factory overhead, and that is a part of my report. Thank you for listening and watching, and that's all. Thank you.